Yay.
Beautiful. There's a little bit of a lag on the Facebook thing, so I'm not sure where it'll be. But good morning and or afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. Um,
Yay.
Yay! My name's Randy, and thanks. I'm not sure where it'll be. But good morning and or afternoon. There we go. I am Randy of Realness Rising, and I'm here with Viv LaQueer, and I am so excited to have this conversation. We have so many beautiful, juicy topics to talk about in the realm of grief and loss and love and so many more things. This is part of an interview series called Morning Glory Grief Stories. And we're basically sharing and highlighting the stories of different people who are using their grief to create incredible, inspiring, wonderful, healing things in the world. And so, in the realm of those topics, I can think of no one who embodies this better than you, Viv.
Yay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Wow.
thank you so much for being here. Can you share a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me and for being this amplifier of conversations about grief. I know you're so committed to like destigmatizing grief and just like bringing it into our consciousness with greater visibility. And there's no one I can think of more that like kind of embodies pleasure in life. So I love that we get to have this conversation about maybe grief and pleasure and how those things go together, even though that sounds weird. But I am Viv LaQueer. I have been calling myself mostly a reality architect these days. I do that through various mediums with folks, whether it be astrology or therapeutic coaching, um, and psychedelic work. I have a lot of different modalities and tools that I use. I studied to be an art therapist originally, and I also studied with a traditional Mexican medicine woman, journeying through altered states of consciousness. So, kind of put all of that in like a shaker and lots of other things I didn't name and put it together, and that's what you get from me. But I
Wow.
love to work with people and collaborate with people on their journeys, often when they're going through big transitions or just realizing like their life isn't really reflecting who they are by their essence. I work with a lot of people who are kind of like, oh, how did I get here? Is kind of what they're asking themselves, and they're ready to locate themselves in a different place or create a different experience through life. And that can be through healing, if we want to call it that. But often I just call it like coming into harmony with our essence and coming into balance. Because within us, I truly believe we have limitless identities and possibilities we can embody. And it's pretty much all neutral, neither are better or worse, but maybe more us, more in alignment, more in resonance with who we think our essence are and who we know our essence to be. So I work with folks to really like align their life to their essence. And so I talk a lot about taking aligned action. And the reason I love the like title reality architect is because I think we don't often realize the agency we have in our lives to kind of create the rules by which we live. And often it's experiences like grief that show us that we actually have a lot more agency than we realize, even when it comes to reality. And
I
yeah,
love that. I love that piece of accountability and like that you're working with someone to construct their reality, to first construct the vision that's in
mhm,
alignment and then to like make it a reality.
mhm.
I
Yeah.
really, really appreciate yeah, the accountability that comes in there of somebody really getting clarity about who they are and letting that be a reflection of what they want to make out of their life.
Yeah. And I think often we are given and imprinted so many rules of reality and how we think it's supposed to work. I know for me, I grew up in a very pretty like religious household. So I really had this idea like if I'm a good girl, if I'm a good person, life will turn out a certain way. And it was actually grief that showed me that's not quite how it works. And
Mhm.
also, some of those like good girl tendencies weren't even really me, right? It was coming from fear, like scarcity, wanting to belong, all of these things. So, I'll get more into that a bit later. But yeah, it was really realizing like I could be bad and still receive goodness in life. And again, we'll get more into like the kind of nitty gritty of that later. But I was like, oh, this is like life works a lot. The rules of life work a lot differently than I thought they might, again, from this very religious kind of strict upbringing. And so grief gave me the opportunity to play with some of that. And because life was already kind of crashing down at that time. And so it was like, well, if everything's already on fire, what happens if I pour some gas on it, you know? And it was just, it created different opportunities and experiences for me. And I think when we're talking a lot about healing and wellness, it's very much oversaturated with love and light, and I don't love that. And that feels inauthentic. And to, I think, resonates with me, what resonates with me around your work is that it's not just about that. Grief can be dark and chaotic and still pleasurable in these funny ways. You know, it's not all about the silver lining, and we don't always have to hang out there in order to create the life of our dreams, you know?
Totally.
So,
I love you keep like sharing things that I'm like, oh, let's talk more about that. And then you'll touch back on it. So I love that so much. But there was something that happened in your eyes. There was this like little sparkle in your eyes when you started talking about the gasoline. And I think that, yeah, like I think that there's something there about when people think about grief, oftentimes I get questions around like this, like the heaviness of that experience and how it's just like you're on your knees. It's this big, cathartic, sad, painful experience. But I think one of the things about just like the wildness of it and like
mhm,
untamed nature of grief is like, it sometimes can give us permission when we can lean into some of the wisdom. It can give us permission for the chaos and to like
mhm.
explore some of the like what happens when we are bad or what happens when we break the rules. Or I know my grief gave me a lot of permission to be like mean to people and
Oh
rage
yeah.
because I was just like, I don't have the fucking bandwidth for what's happening right now.
Yeah,
And so,
absolutely.
like, and I was witnessing the pleasure in that when I saw that sparkle in your eye. And I can, yeah, I want to hear more and more about
Yes.
how you've utilized that. But I was just
Yeah.
really appreciating bringing in how sometimes that freedom and sometimes that chaos can really, it like feels good to let those
Mhm.
parts of us out.
Yeah, and I think like what hasn't yet been said about that, right, is like when a loved one dies, when a soulmate person in your life is no longer in the physical realm with you, you're just like, fuck everything. Like nothing's important. Or it really
Yeah.
makes the things that are not important so apparent that they're not important that then you're just like, today I'm a bitch. Or like, you know, to your point, it's like, I don't have the bandwidth to put on my good girl face and to
Yeah.
be like, I'm a good person because I'm polite. Because that's not where I am right now. Like
Yeah.
I'm shorter than I used to be, or I'm curt, or I just can't deal with this, or I'm not going to be in this friendship anymore because it's not aligned, or I'm not going to put up with this anymore because I just simply don't want to, you know? And so grief was like this really powerful for me permission slip as a recovering perfectionist, as a like a people pleaser, as somebody who is very much socialized to kind of fulfill these like feminine roles of like good girl. Really gave me the permission slip to be like not that and to still accept myself. It was like, you know, it was a windy road, but it was still like, why not? Like, why can't you still be a good person, but not always be like so overly polite? You know, why can't you still be a good person, but not over compromise yourself? Like, why wouldn't those things be able to be true, you know?
Totally.
So, I kind of want to go back briefly just to like my project because it very
Yeah.
much has
Yeah.
to do with this, and then I'll get into like more of mother like,
We go into
and
these
this is what
trains
happened to
forever.
me. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I do want to share that as well. But
Absolutely.
um,
Yes. Please share your project with us because that's
yeah, so I'm very excited. I have in the past offered like women's groups for psychedelic integration, and through that process was just so astounded and like honestly brought to my knees on like what we were all working with through psychedelic integration, like collaborating with plant medicine, kind of like what was coming out for us. And so much of it was like breaking up with our good girl conditioning, slowing down and responding to things instead of like knee jerk reactions to maybe over giving or even being angry at people for asking us for things. Just really like what I would call like breaking up with toxic femininity, to be
Mhm.
honest. That was like a really big theme that kept coming up in these women's groups. So I wanted to like expand that past just like psychedelic integration because I think like while psychedelics is one way to do that, reality creation, which psychedelics are like a version of reality creation, but just reality creation as you want to do it is another way to like be in that process. So I decided to, my psychedelic integration groups were just 4 weeks. So then I was like, I want to do an 8-week women's group. for women, femmes, gender nonconforming people. And we're gonna just like be in this what I call like the shadow vortex, which is really about embracing the parts of ourselves that we're afraid of or that we feel like we have to keep under wraps, and embracing the kind of like darkness and chaos that's within each of us to help us create that like pleasurable life that we're desiring. And it may even sound a little like, well, how does that, how does one thing go with the other? But what I've found is when we really buckle down and work on trusting ourselves, like truly trusting ourselves and our kind of like innate desires, even if that desire is like, seems like I kind of want to like hurt this person, like not physically, right? But like with my words, right? Like I feel like I want to snap back, like this kind of like energy we can have, or like I have these desires that feel like they don't align with like the intimate relationship I'm in. Like these things that then we really like brush under the rug and we try and
Sounds like
hide.
the potential to be destructive a little bit.
Exactly. It's like that destructive goddess energy we all have. The more we can embrace that and the more we can come into harmony with that energy and give her space, give them space to exist in our sphere, we become so much more potent as creatrixes. Like we just become, I find like so much more in our pleasure, because we view pleasure then not as only this act of love and light and like not only this act of being a good girl. We view the pleasure in the sorrow. We view the pleasure in the chaos. And so then we're not creating it subconsciously anymore. Because that's really what happens. And what I was seeing in myself and with some of my clients is like we're self-sabotaging. And it's
Mhm.
because we're so like committed. We're like, I'm a good person, I'm a good girl. Like that's not what is being
Like
said on the
shoving that
forefront.
destructive part of us down.
And so then she comes from over here and then she fucks something up over here that you're like, oh, and it's like,
I'm
and it's
having
like,
this
wow.
whole, I'm having
Mhm.
this whole visual of Moana,
Oh,
or
yeah.
like
Yeah.
PT when she comes up at the end, and it's this like acknowledgement that like there is this darkness inside of you and this acceptance of that, and that's when harmony
I know
happens.
I'm like, I'm like about to cry thinking of like the forehead to forehead moment, right?
Yes,
And like,
exactly.
and that's exactly what it is it's like I don't want my like I think a lot about the goddess Kali, like, and she's like so fierce, like she wears the like heads of like the those who have crossed her, like, and she like a lot of depictions of her literally like skulls on platters and just like teeth, like just grotesque, and we've, I think, in a lot of spirituality these days either shy away completely of that or we glorify it in a way that's still unbalanced. And so I'm like, let's bring it all into balance, because what I was seeing, like I said, with myself and with my clients is we would participate in really like helpful healing behaviors for periods of time, but then something would happen where we would kind of like snap, or we would feel like we had a relapse of sorts, call the ex, or participate in some behavior that you hadn't participated in a long time. And there would be so much shame and judgment around that. And so what I really work with my people around is like, hey, what if this is just a neutral behavior? And like,
Mm.
what's actually going on here? What are we seeking here? You want to seek some, you want to have that sensation of chaos. So much of us grew up with chaos. We're going to create that in our present lives. But how can we create that in a way that's like a bit more fun and in alignment with who we are now, instead of like having it like sneak up on us, And I think something we have talked about is like kink and BDSM are really fun ways to explore things that may be taboo, power dynamics that feel edgy and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of times, like exercise, certain kinds of exercise for me, like climbing is another way. Like, I'm afraid of heights, but I really enjoy climbing because it does like get my body going into this like fight or flight state. And I'm there with myself, I'm breathing, and I'm like, okay, we're cool, this is what we're doing, and leaning into that sensation of like, oh my god, I feel like I'm gonna die right now, but it's like there's a part of me that likes that, and I have to honor that and not shove that away. So the shadow vortex is 8 weeks of us. I'm taking us through a very clear process though, like of trust. We're examining like our beliefs that are quite maybe judgmental, or the things that feel like they are expansive and that help us create, and then also the things that feel like they get in our way, and like our views of ourselves, how we're holding our story. We were really, it's also somatic work that we'll be doing again around like taking a trust inventory of your body and your being, like how that works for you, how you communicate with yourself. There's also pieces about like your spiritual fluency. I really believe each person has their own language of spirit. And our role here in this life is developing a fluency around that. So I love to guide people through that process. I don't know what their language is, right? But it's more about just like helping them ask certain questions or us digging together and being like, okay, how does your language work? How does spirit speak to you? What are the signs and symbols for you? And what do they mean? Because you can't Google that shit, you know?
Mhm.
And so,
Sounds like helping people listen to themselves
exactly,
so that the parts of themselves maybe that they exile or shut down or shame
exactly,
aren't necessarily like covertly in the driver's seat. Because
exactly.
bitches are gonna come, they're gonna make themselves known about what they need, no matter what.
Exactly. It's who, that's another question
Might
I
as well
ask.
do it in a relationship, is what I'm hearing you
Exactly.
say.
Let's be in a relationship. Who's driving right now? And then it's like, oh, did it feel like they hijacked the car, like the bus that all of ourselves are on?
Yeah,
And can we get them out of the driver's seat? Can we actually let them drive for a little while and like see what happens? And that's where that self-trust, it all is really rooted in self-trust. Like this is a big action activity and like exercise in self-trust, which grief is very funny how it brings you close to this self-trust process, I think, because it really lifts the veil of illusion. Because like as we talked about, like it's like nothing that's not important is important while you're grieving, and it's so feral and kind of like raw,
yeah.
that grief is often an opportunity. And I mean grief from anything, just like life transitions, maybe losing a loved one, but moving, losing a job, starting a new relationship even can be a process of grief, you know.
Absolutely. An illness, a life transition, becoming a parent.
Exactly. There's like so many ways that like
So many
grief shows
ways.
up, right? And
Yeah.
is and kind of puts us in an altered state of consciousness. And I love to like utilize and leverage that altered state of consciousness to then be like, okay, like how are we going to be when we're out of this moment, right? What do we want to like implant here now so that it continues on with us? So that's kind of like architecture of life. So I'm so excited to offer this. This like, and it's a very intimate group. It's only 4 people. So there's a lot of time for sharing, and I do kind of like hot seat coaching, that kind of thing. And it's fun because everyone learns so much from each other. And that's what I was finding in my integration groups as well, is when we would have these like kind of hot seat moments, like everyone was just like crying and like, oh my gosh, I feel that too. And like, I'm so there with you. You know, it felt like such a beautiful communion of like women and femmes. And so I'm definitely
It's
like
so
very
powerful. That's so powerful. I mean, I'm really appreciating how many different things you're combining together in this flow. And it seems like such a thoughtful and like well-rounded way to really address some of these things, both like from the inside out and
yes.
like I'm really also appreciating like grief needs community. I stand firmly in this to heal. Like we
Yes.
can do some work on our own. Doing our own stuff is really important. But I'm also appreciating the ability to be in witness and to have other people just around on this journey together, even though the journey is like with themselves first and then outward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like I want to like second, third, and fourth that like grief is meant to be experienced in community.
Yeah,
And I love one-on-one coaching, of course, like love that intimacy, but there is something that is so magical when we come together in these like pods and in these groups and create these vortexes. So that's why it's like the shadow vortex. And because that's what we're entering into. And we come out the other side, like still with our shadow. You know, I'm such a big fan of the darkness and the shadow. And just because of, you know, what it taught me, which then I can start now talking about the grief process and how that changed my work and just allowed me to embrace my fullness in a different way than I ever have.
totally. I'm gonna just highlight one other thing that you said, which I really am appreciating and I'm learning from. I just love that you called grief this altered state of consciousness, because I know that
Mhm.
you work with altered state of consciousness through
Yeah.
psychedelics, through kink and BDSM, but I'm just appreciating framing grief as this altered state because it does actually feel like this divine place of like,
Mhm.
I don't know, like it's an altered, yeah, I'm really appreciating that framing. And yeah, I wonder if there's any more that you want to say about that before we get into your story.
Yeah, I think what I'll say about that is so when I started my graduate program as like a psychotherapist,
Mhm.
I also started apprenticing with a dear mentor of mine who is a curandera. So she's like a traditional like Mexican medicine woman. It's like a certain syncretic system of like African philosophy and spirituality, indigenous wisdom, even Chinese medicine. There's like a lot of mixing, even like some like there's even like some like Spanish medicine, like Western ideas, and like it's a lot of different things, and it depends on who's practicing it. I will say that too is like the lens you're getting. But she was somebody or is somebody that she doesn't work with plant medicines that alter you like cannabis or like mushrooms. Like those were not in her like medicine bag, but she did work with like plantitas, like lavender, chamomile, more gentle plants. So but we very much worked with altered states of consciousness. So she taught me how to like journey into sacred space. And this is something that I do with my clients now as well, like journey into your own sacred space. And that's how you kind of get to know yourself more and like the rules of your reality. And it also helps with like nervous system regulation because you're in this like altered state. And also we would do it through like sound meditation. And so I became a sound healer and all this stuff. But so I first learned kind of like what an altered state was through that practice of like meditation and journeying with her. And I loved to be there so much. I like would cry when she would have me come back and I would just be like, "No, I don't want to. Like life is so hard. I just want to be in sacred space. Like I hate this." And she would be like, "Well, you have to come back. This is why you're here. This is, I was having grief in that. Like I don't want to be human. I want to be in my spirit realm. And but she was very encouraging and she was like, "You're here to have this human experience and you will go back to that place and that's why you're comfortable there. It's okay." And just so encouraging. But I felt the energy of like what it was to be in an altered state, and I was like pretty depressed at the time, and I felt myself like kind of like healing that, like, and being in a different way with it through journeying with her. So that was interesting because I was also in like academic like therapist school at the time, and I was like, oh well, like the thing that's actually most profound right now like isn't my psychotherapy with like honestly the terrible therapist I had at the time, but it was like my medicine practice through altered states. At the end of my graduate school experience, my grandmother passed, and that was incredibly hard for me. She was I think I have like, you have many soulmates, but my like original soulmates in my life were or are my dad and my grandmother, and I lost them within a year span of each other. And so when my grandmother passed, I remember realizing I was in an altered state. I would write poetry about it at the time, but like I randomly was driving and I like ran a stoplight and I didn't realize it till I was like kind of past. And I was like, whoa, like I'm really dissociated. I'm in this altered state. And there were just other things that I was noticing myself in this very floaty space. And some therapists might call it dissociated. But there was something different about the texture of it. As somebody who's been dissociating since I was young, I'm like, this is different than that. This is like, which dissociation is an altered state, but we can come back to that later, but or not. So I was having this like awareness, and I felt so close to the spirit realm at that time, which is often for me how I experience altered states is like what my teacher would call like seeing with a fine eye and listening with a fine ear. So I was like, okay, this is interesting. I'm in this altered state. I feel very close to spirit realm. I feel very sacred at this time. I felt my room was full of altars and flowers, and I was just like in this place of reverence, but I was also just like so sad. I was just like, I didn't even want to finish graduate school at that. Like, I was just like, what's the point? And luckily, I had community. I had a couple of really good friends in the program. I was so close to finishing that they were like, you're already done. Like, just show up to this thing and you're going to finish. I had friends taking me camping and um, just really supporting me at that time. But yeah, it was like that was my first really big, I think, experience with grief. I had lost relatives and loved ones before that, but that where I was really like, this is spirit. Like, this is spiritual. This is God. This is like the closest I've ever felt to God, if you believe in that kind of thing. I don't believe in like a traditional God, but that creation energy, because that creation energy, this is the same. Destruction energy is the same because you have to kind of like destroy something for something else to be creative, right? Like nothing's created or destroyed, it's just like transferred. It's just kind of like that thing. So yeah, that
So,
was like my first really like, this is an altered state. This is a portal. I guess I saw it as a portal.
wow. Wow. I'm like my whole system, I'm doing a whole lot of internal regulation around all the parts that are like so excited about so many different parts of what you're saying. And also just like feeling into the tenderness of losing these like two soul people so,
Mhm.
so close together. Shout out to
Mhm.
the friends who took care of you and really supported
Yeah.
you during that time. Those people are critical.
Mhm.
And there's something about the way we're describing this altered state and the way like the spiritual realm, the access to God or godliness or just that like universal essence energy. And I'm thinking about the juxtaposition of that in our modern world where we make that like a clinical experience. Like somebody looking in might say she's depressed or
Mhm.
there this is a problem or this is disordered behavior.
Right.
And
Yeah, so
I'm
true.
really appreciating you taking it to this place of like I don't, and that's kind of why it's coming back to like the altered state reframe being so huge for me because I exist a lot in the mental health world. That
Mhm.
it's taking away, it's allowing the reverence for like the
Mhm.
spiritual, the magical journey, the sort of like, it's like an alchemizing journey
Uh-huh.
that was, and you being able to see it for that, as
Mhm.
opposed to I'm stuck here in this depression, I'm out of touch with reality, I'm dissociating. I'm seeing
Mhm.
you really reframe it for yourself as like just awareness of how much access to the spirit realm you had in that moment.
Yeah,
And
and, like, also,
little
like, shout
shame
out
notices.
to my medicine teacher, like, Teresa, like, she I remember I went to her, I think it was the day, it might have been the day my grandmother died, like, she happened to have a little opening for me, a little time for me, and I went and saw her and just fell, and she's like a grandmother energy for me as well, and I just kinda fell into her arms and was like, "I am so sad," and, like, right now even, I'm, like, feeling that grief I felt at that time, which is kinda beautiful because I haven't felt it in a while, that I was just like, "What will I do? What can I do? Like, this is like, how will I go on?" And she was just like, it was so beautiful because with like a firm love, she was like, "This isn't about you right now. This is actually about like you helping your grandmother transition
Mm.
through the spirit realm." And I want to say too, like, I have a very strong relationship to spirit, and that is really helpful in these times. Like, not even that, like, oh, this is all like gonna work out fine, but like under feeling like my role in life as a medicine woman, like really has helped me through these times because they feel like initiations. And this is like, this is what you have to do. Like, this is part of like being a medicine woman is it's not love and light. It is like being in the darkness and
Having
being
seen the shit and then being able
the
to like
shit.
hold the light for others as they're in the shit too.
Exactly. And allowing yourself to like be in this darkness and the chaos and the confusion and the sadness without needing to make it better. Like that, I feel like that actually is what makes a really powerful medicine person is like, I don't have to rush to make this better. And so she was like, again, very loving. She was like, you will grieve when your period is over, like of kind of walking your grandmother to the edge of spirit realm. And she gave me different rituals to do for 9 days. And I went to the ocean every day during those 9 days and like brought flowers and prayed to the ocean and sang to the ocean and talked to my grandmother. And like, my teacher was just like, you're going to walk her home.
Mhm.
And this is your gift and this is part of your initiation. And I had friends go with me because I would go to the ocean like at sunset or at night. And each friend that went with me said, that because they would kind of stand further up on the beach and I would go to the water and I would start the ritual and I would sing to the water and talk and like give the water flowers. And each of my friends said, when I went to the water to pray, it was like everything got quiet and the ocean would like kind of come meet me, like exactly where I was. And it would be quiet. And it was just like, that's what I mean about like I've never felt closer to God than that time. And because I felt that, but I didn't know anyone else could see that, of course, because it's like I'm not like, I don't know, I'm just not thinking that's visible. But even the people who are kind of witnessing were just like, holy shit, like, something is happening here. And so I want to speak to ritual also as a way to hold us through grief. Because without that ritual and without feeling like I had a role, which was to walk my soulmate home, which is like what could be more sacred and special, right? Than to like gift the woman who taught me how to love, who like held me in my first moments of life. Like what could be more special, right? Than like walking her home. Like there's nothing could have soothed me more. And then at the end of the 9 days, that was when my grief process really started. And I got like a bit depressed and I kind of fell apart and these other things started to happen, which happens with grief. I think you have the initial shock phase and you're still sad and you're still feeling, but it's this still this like this shock. And then it gets ever more feral. And and so but yeah, it was just like so powerful. And so I just want to honor that. Like I know not everybody has that relationship to spirit or spirituality. And that can be very difficult. Like that's really I know somebody right now, I'm actually working with somebody who lost their son and they're like, I don't believe in God right now, you know? And I'm like, of course you don't. Like, you know, why would you? Why
Mm.
would you? Like, there is no God that would allow this to happen, right? And just like, that's okay too, you know? But in that phase, for me, the beauty of it was that creation, that spiritual process. And I like, to this day, have the image of like my grandmother, like walking, dancing really on the ocean, like going home. And it was just like so special. And I still, when I think of her, I see that joy and that dancing and that freedom and so that's something that really like even in the darkness, you know, I'm like that's very sacred and special. So
Yeah. And how meaningful to have like to find the purpose for yourself
mhm,
first in the transitioning and in the relationship, sort of attending to the relationship between you. And
mhm,
then after honoring that, really taking the time for yourself to grieve and to go into that darkness.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was something. So then that kind of started me towards more, I had always been interested in like kink and BDSM. I had kind of been on the outskirts of that. And then kind of between my grandmother passing and my father was sick at the same time, my second soulmate, he was sick. And so I had started kind of like dabbling in like dominatrixing, like domination. Because again, like I mentioned, like I was a good girl. I was raised to be very helpful to everyone, to kind of like say yes a lot. I'm in the helping profession, you know, to kind of like overgive almost feels like a badge of honor for a lot of the women in my family. You know, hearing about women talked about, I was like, oh, she's so selfless. It's like the first thing you say about somebody. I'm like, ugh, like, no, we don't want her to be I want her to be selfish, like, you know, but kind of grappling with that. And I think there's something even as I'm telling this story, I'm like, oh, and it's interesting that my grandmother, the matriarch of my family, who absolutely had wounding around not being seen and not receiving in the way that she gave, right? That she would pass and then suddenly I would be like, I'm gonna be a dominatrix. Like,
Mhm.
I'm gonna like step on somebody's face in high heels and they're gonna be like, thank you, mistress, you know, like thank you, goddess. Like I love that. You know, like I want to get paid for no reason. You know, I want to like kind of humiliate somebody. But what was interesting to me, and it still fulfilled this piece of me that was like, you know, improper kink and BDSM, you're only doing that to people who ask for it, like who are literally like, this is what I want. I want you to like pee on me and then like tell me I'm bad and like whatever it is. Like it's prearranged. So there it still satisfied this piece of me that's like, I want to give people what they want. But then
And
I
create their
too,
reality, architect their reality with
yeah,
that.
architect their reality exactly. And they want to feel humiliated and small and out of control. And I want to feel in control. But the reality is actually like we've collaborated, like we're creating this thing together. And
Mm,
they're just getting exactly what they want. And I get to express this like bad girl energy, this like, I don't give a fuck about you energy kind of thing that was so new for me.
mm,
And part of that too on the other side was like I was playing with domination. And then I met somebody who um he was like became not like my dom but almost like a very caring, like I called him daddy, right, but not appropriate as like my dad's dying, right, but like he like took care of me in different ways by like helping. We would have like very specific structures set up. So one of them was like we would go to the gym together and he would like make a workout for me, and then I would get like spanks based on like how like fast I ran a mile or stuff like that. But I was like earning spanks. It was like stuff like that. Or he would take me to dinner, he would like take me shopping, like whatever it is, playing in this dynamic that like prior to this like I had kind of wanted to experience, but I had a lot of shame about that because I was like, oh, that's like, is that like sugar baby shit? And like it's also like, what the fuck is wrong with being a sugar baby? Like if that's the defined like agreement that you have with another person, what's wrong with that?
mm.
And so so yeah,
And
so it was
you
also
just really taking this time to really push against all of the like, what will they think?
Yeah. What am I
Like,
supposed to
yeah.
be?
Hmm.
Right? And just being like, I'm actually just going to be whatever I want to be. And so, and with that too, I will say, like, I was constructing these relationships that had very clear boundaries. They had very clear roles. Like, I knew how many like spanks I was going to get based on how fast I ran the mile. It was like this predictability that like grief doesn't give you, right? So it was creating some predictability and some structure for me while also getting to experience the taboo of life and stuff like that. So I was also just like in a lot of different kink and BDSM classes, like learning about it, learning how to do it safely, and then exploring power dynamics. And so I was on, either side of those power dynamics. But I will say, like, I had that one relationship where I was in a more like babyish, like submissive role, but I didn't even feel submissive to be honest. It was like it was really about like my agency, but more than that, I was really exploring that like dominatrix, like persona and role, because that was just I feel like in my life in a way, I guess I fulfill a submissive role of really like honoring people and
Being
like
of
flowing with
service.
it. Yeah, being of service.
Mhm.
And so that's like not what I was interested in. I was really interested in like, what's it like for me to feel like I have power over somebody, even though it's a little bit of an illusion, right? But like, what is that like?
Mhm.
Because kind of like what I was saying earlier, I had constructed my world around like being a good person, being in integrity, la la la, all this stuff, and feeling like, well, if
All
you
that
do that, your
appropriate
life,
stuff.
yeah, all the appropriate things. And if you
Socially
do that, then
appropriate.
yeah, appropriate. And then if you do that, your life just turns out perfectly.
Mhm.
And I was like, fuck my life. It is far from perfect. And also, I was like doing therapy work, living in San Francisco, feeling really broke, like feeling just like kind of like compressed in. Like I felt like very confined in different ways. And so I was like, well, clearly life doesn't work how I thought. So what happens if I just start breaking all these rules? Then what starts to happen? And I realized like life started to be more fun, to be honest. I started to receive a lot more pleasure and also my life started to change. So relationships that I had like kind of fell away. Also as part of the grief process. Just like my world and then COVID hit. Like my father passed about a year later, COVID hit. So it was just like change after like topsy-turvy chaos. And so if I hadn't found kind of and it wasn't even that through all that I was consistently practicing kink and BDSM, but it was the tenets and the rules of that and kind of the structures of that that then helped me keep going.
Mhm.
So with life during those chaotic times. So allowing myself to indulge behaviors like I'm gonna text this ex that like maybe I shouldn't talk to, but I let myself do it and I was like, I really want to talk to him. I really want to talk to this person. And I get this and being very clear, what do you want out of this interaction? Oh, I like that we talk like XYZ. And I like the energy of that. And that brings me pleasure. So I'm gonna do that and I would do that and then and not have but also not have these expectations of like, oh well, like he's going to be here for me all the time and he can like be a shoulder to cry on because that's never who he was, right? But I wanted a specific fulfillment about the way we engaged that I knew I could get, right?
Yeah.
Part of this, I think, like we're talking about with kink, I was talking about relationship structures and agreements. So that helped me realize like certain people can give you certain things and that's it. They're not, their capacity is not that they can fulfill other roles in life. So it allowed me to more consciously engage with the people in my life because I started seeing them for what they were capable of actually instead of who I wanted them to be. And
Mhm.
that gives you like a lot of self responsibility and accountability, like we were talking about in the beginning. So then I would have these moments of like,
Sounds like
relapse.
life came down off a pedestal, all these people in your life, like just letting them be who they are. And yeah,
Mhm.
life was handing you this sort of shitstorm. And you were like, well,
I'll
grief
take it.
and kink and these altered states, like all sort of take what is appropriate and just like
Smash it to
smash it.
smithereens.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so then like, all this to say, eventually I was led to psychedelics. Psychedelics were another portal for me, of like accept your full self. Psychedelics were really just like, you humans, like a lot of my psychedelic journeys have been like the mushrooms kind of like laughing at me, being like, you humans take yourselves so seriously. You think it's like so serious over there. And honestly, you're supposed to just be having fun. And so I really take that to be like responsible fun, of course. Like, because
Yeah.
there's a version of this
I think
shadow
you're
self.
intentional. You're not just like willy-nilly doing this. You're
You're not
doing this
just like
with
hurting. And
whoever.
sometimes I did hurt people, right? And I had to be accountable to that and be like, oh, because you just hurt people in life. It happens. And so to walk through life thinking, be even like when we're a good girl, when we're not sharing our truth, we're enabling people. That's also not nice. We're also hurting people through that act, right? So again, being very trying to be as real as possible with myself about what I want at any given time, what behavior I'm willing to like kind of participate in, because I have to have my own back at the end of the day with whatever like thing I'm doing. In kink, we talk about like risk aware, right?
Mm,
It's like risk aware, it's consensual. So it's like, what risks am I going to take? Like, am I aware of them fully? Like, let me make sure I am. So then I can make an educated choice on like what behavior I'm going to participate in. Because if I make a mess, even though I'm living this way in the way in alignment with my shadow, if I make a mess, I still have to clean it up. Like, just because I'm playing in my shadow doesn't mean I don't have to clean it up, or I don't have to make amends, or I don't have to take responsibility for the shit show that I've created. I do. Just because I'm sad doesn't mean I get to be a dick, And it's like,
Or it's shit show, but you still have to clean it up at the end.
yeah, you
Yeah.
still gotta like, and so I've had to do that as well. It's not been like a perfect ride, but I'm so happy. That sounds weird to say, but I'm like happy with the outcome because it feels very me. At the end of the day, I have participated in some things like another version of me would be like, I can't believe you did that, you bad girl, or like, you terrible person. But I'm there, like, and I can honor her and be like, I see where you're coming from and I know why you think that. But nothing I do can make, like, take away my value as a person. And nothing I do can give me more value as a person. Like, there's literally no act I can participate that like makes me more or less worthy in life. So like let me just like be in alignment with my essence. And sometimes my essence is like a dark, chaotic, like destructive goddess. And so I'm like, I do my best to align with that and create like, dance with that in a way that creates harmony in life. And like I said, just like a big reason why, and like the shadow vortex we work with trust is because it's like, if you don't trust yourself to have your own back when you're participating in these shadowy behaviors, you're going to hurt yourself, and in a way that is going to create more chaos and more harm than good. And we're going to do a little bit of that anyways, but we have to be able to kind of like stomach ourselves. My goal and my hope for all of us is that we can look ourselves in the mirror and be like, you did that and that was crazy, and I love you and I'm proud of you and I see why, and like, let's keep going. And
Mhm.
so yeah, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. I'm wondering, like, for anybody that's watching, that's like a little on the fence, right? Because we're talking about sort of like maybe the deep end of the swamp where it's like dark and we're like really like allowing ourselves to indulge in
Hmm.
the various desires we have, longings we have, things that we feel called to do, or even not, like the things we just want to experiment with about ourselves.
Hmm.
I'm curious if there's somebody who's like kind of on the fence, still maybe navigating some of that like good girl mentality of like, I don't
Hmm.
want to be harmful. I want to lead with gratitude and happiness and light. What might you say to them
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
like even just like dipping their toe in to some of this dark?
Totally. I would just be like, okay, you want to really stay in like the gratitude, the beauty, the light. What's really important about that for you? Because that's okay, right? But I would be like, let's get super clear. What's super important about that for you? And see if you can trace that back. Where does that come from? Like, is that yours? And cool if it is. I'm not at all trying to like poke holes and be like, that's not yours. But I'm like, let's be clear. Is that yours? And then the follow-up question would be like, what happens if you're not those things?
Mm,
Then who are you? Like when you mess up, because we all do, or when you can't hold that 100% of the time, because none of us can hold anything 100% of the time. Then who are you? And what does that mean about you? Just be like, I want to just like, the vision I have is just like taking off shackles. Like, if
mm,
that person wants to stay majority in that area of their life, I fully am behind that for them. But I want them to be there from a place of freedom, not obligation. And so I would that follow-up question to me would be really important of like,
Sounds like finding where the shoulds
no.
are. Like, is this coming from a place of should, as opposed to like, I consciously choose this?
Yeah. And that was a powerful thing for me to ask myself was like, oh, what if I'm not a special good girl? Then do I become? And I was like, oh, well, then I'm just like still myself. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, and that's lit. I just want to be myself. So that
Yeah.
was what started to like kind of like, rupture it a little bit in a good way, like earthquake it a little bit. And like I said, my goal is never to like is not to pull people to the dark side if that's not like where they are, but is just that people are choosing these things from a place of sovereignty and freedom. That's all. And that we aren't like building our ideas of ourselves on like sand.
Yeah.
Like the foundation of who we are and how we are feels like solid.
Yeah. Mm, that is so, so beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm really appreciating that. I'm actually thinking back to like one of the conversations we had. Viv and I met on a retreat in Thailand, and it was something that you and I were talking. Viv did a reading for me that was like
I
it
know what you're gonna say,
still
I think.
ripples, but I'm thinking about that it wasn't quite good girl stuff that we were talking about, but it was just the risk of like being offensive or the risk of like
Mhm.
pushing people away.
I
And,
remember.
like that's been something I've really been playing with since our conversation is like,
Yeah.
how do I just be real and true to myself in this moment, even if it's at a risk to this relationship? Because
Mhm.
where that stands on, then I'm not like leading from this place of like, oh my God, they're going to leave me. It's not, I'm not like living in that fear, but I'm actually,
Mhm.
I can still prioritize connection with somebody. It's
Mhm.
not coming from a place of like, I just want you to like me. And I'm afraid that you'll leave me if I'm not playing this role. How
Amazing.
do I be real? And maybe that comes at a risk. I might offend you. I might hurt you. I might push you away. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, it's what this is bringing up in me. I'm just,
Yeah. Well, I
there's a
remember
lot of
that.
power in that work.
And I remember that, and that's a conversation I have a lot with folks like you or like me who are in the like wellness sphere or play this role of holding space for others and who are very empathetic is we confuse our discomfort in relationships sometimes with, oh, I'm doing something wrong. And
Mhm.
for those of us who are very socialized to be people pleasers or to like do the right thing, it's uncomfortable to disappoint people. I remember having this conversation with you, like you're gonna disappoint people, or people are not gonna like the boundary you set, or not gonna like the new Randy, the new version of you. But that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. So we can't
Mhm.
confuse like discomfort with like, oh, I'm going against my intuition. Like sometimes it's actually uncomfortable to go with your intuition or with what might actually be in alignment with you,
Yeah.
especially when we've been socialized to ignore that or to work against that. And so something I play with too, like this is like an existential king practice, right? With like Carolyn Elliott like spearheaded a lot of this, but I know there are other systems you can look to do work like this, is leaning into that sensation of discomfort and being like, oh my God, like my heart's beating so fast. Like, am I turned on or am I uncomfortable? Like, probably both, But like allowing, because we create situations for ourselves where we're in that sensation like quite a bit, we'll start to notice. So it's like, oh, there's part of me that clearly like gets off on this. So can I lean into it and just like be with the somatic sensations of it? And then also tell myself, like, ooh, you're getting what you want right now. It's very fun. And it really starts to like shift things, and then we're not shy of discomfort, and like simply being uncomfortable doesn't take us away from then doing the thing that we might need to do. I know like Felicia, who hosted the retreat, she talks a lot about doing it scared, and I love
Yes.
that.
Doing
Doing
it
it
scared and
scared,
doing it messy
yeah,
are the
doing it messy,
yeah,
doing it scared, and doing it
yeah,
uncomfortable. And I'm a
yeah.
big fan of the like all of that too, because it's like
Shout out to
do
Felicia.
that. Yeah, shout out to Felicia for this,
Yeah.
honestly. And just like you can do it like that, like then nothing kind of holds you back, because it's like, Felicia often says, she's like, if you're waiting for like the right time, you're gonna be waiting forever.
Yeah.
And I second, third,
Totally.
fourth, fifth that completely.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what I was picturing when I heard or when you said the unshackling is just
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. The pleasure of that, the enjoyment of that releasing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to share that you want us to know?
I mean, I feel like we went everywhere all the
Not
time.
everywhere.
DM me with any questions anyone might have.
Yes. Tell us how we can find you.
Yeah, so this is going to be on Facebook as well as my Instagram, which is Your Practical Mystic. Feel free to DM me if you're curious about the Shadow Vortex or any other work, psychedelic work that you would like to do together if you have any questions. I love to direct people to resources and stuff, even if they're wanting to find out more about microdosing or kink and BDSM, any of that stuff. Um, and just that, like, I love you. If you're watching this and you made it this far, I love you so much. Thank you for listening. And we need you as you are. We need your essence, like as it is. Your medicine is so powerful. And if you ever need that reminder, just like come find me and poke me.
Come
And
join her in the vortex.
yeah, and join me in the vortex. I'll see you all in the ether.
Mhm.
And thank you, Randy, for creating this beautiful space. It's like it's so special. But I think I feel resolved with all that was shared, and yeah, and so this round of the Shadow Vortex, we're going to start at the end of June.
Mm.
So yeah, get in here with your questions, and I have a free 20-minute consult call if anyone wants to just chat and ask more. It's called a chai and cry, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's what I got.
Thank you so, so much, Viv, for being here, for sharing your magic and your medicine. And I feel like sometimes you're just sort of like riffing and just like saying a thing, and like all of this wisdom just comes right out. And so I'm just so grateful for you pouring your wisdom into this
Yay.
container and into the world, and
Absolutely.
making more space for people to be wholly themselves.
Yes.
Holy and holy.
Yeah, all the holes.
All
Just
the whole.
kidding. But yeah, sorry. But yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I'll drop my like being logistical, being like 3D. I'm like, hi,
Mhm.
I'll drop my
Yeah.
booking link below and link my Instagram on Facebook. And this, like I said, this will also be on Instagram, so folks can find me wherever.
Excellent. Oh, Viv, thank you so, so much for being here. And thank you to everyone who came and tuned in or is watching the replay. Hopefully you got some amazing juiciness out of this conversation. And we'll be back here on July 3rd for our next Morning Glory Grief story. And I'm wishing you all a beautiful, meaningful, wonderful day.
Yay.
Not just love and light, and a shadowy, mucky, in the darkness,
Chaotic,
fully chaotic,
raunchy,
embracing
very sexy.
gasoline on top kind of day.
Raunchy, very sexy.
Love it, love it. Thanks, Viv.
Yay.
All right, bye-bye.